Today we're going to be discussing a agenda that's going to be focused around maximizing your investment in the Microsoft Cloud. So obviously, we have lots of customers that are spending a lot of money today in Azure that are really struggling to understand where their money is being spent, who's spending what in the cloud, if they're running efficiently, where the optimization opportunities may lie, and how much waste they actually have out in their environment today. So we'll walk through the challenge that enterprises are faced with today around cost management in the cloud, talk a little bit about the FinOps methodology, which is a best practice framework for dealing with cloud costs. And then we'll talk about some resources that are available to you to help you mature and move along your journey. So enterprises are faced with a really difficult challenge today. There's overarching complexity where a lot of these companies that are consuming cloud today are running thousands of resources across potentially multiple cloud providers, across dozens of different business units, technology teams, and workload owners today that all have varying levels of maturity when it comes to managing cloud spend and cloud resources. 80% of organizations today have said that poor financial management has negatively impacted their business when it comes to cloud spend. Flexera's State of the Cloud report last year stated that currently around 32% of all cloud spend is waste, and that's a self-respondent number. So that's what enterprises are actually estimating that their waste is. So it could be more than that. In some situations and in some customer types. Lack of governance is a big contributing factor to this. Many organizations, really haven't gone that extra step of implementing an organizational-wide governance strategy that encompasses, not only security and compliance side of governance, but also cost. And in a lot of cases, costs are really an afterthought. Where in the cloud, it really shouldn't be. Cost is really, not just a financial metric in the cloud, but often cases it's the first indicator that something is actually wrong or misconfigured. It really needs to be treated as an operational metric in the cloud. So, this is a challenge that, really, touches all areas of the business, and these different areas of the business all have their own, personal responsibilities, accountability, and reasons for needing to have visibility into this and manage this. IT execs, need to better understand cloud spend across the different, business units across the organization. They need to understand if they're maximizing their budgets. Finance teams, need to be able to improve forecasting accuracy of cloud spend and usage, which is very difficult, especially when the business units and the teams that are actually driving the spend in the cloud, often cases aren't talking to finance about new workloads, upcoming initiatives. So that's a big struggle. And business units really need to focus on optimizing their environments, their resources, and being better stewards of their own environment to make sure that they're effectively spending their money. And so, in the past, technology teams really had to, request approvals to spend money, have an understanding of what those costs would look like up front. But in the current state in the cloud, this leads to a lot of challenges. There's success in quick cloud deployments. Teams are really trying to be, more agile and increase, product releases at a faster rate. There's external factors in the market over the past couple of years, like COVID, that have really pushed cloud adoption even further and quicker. And in a lot of cases, this, fast-moving environment creates some challenges around cross-organizational communication. Oftentimes, the right groups aren't being brought into the right discussions at the right time. Often cases, this leads to a lack of governance, a lack of organizational consistency when it comes to managing resources, which can cause scale issues as well as cost overrun. So the typical client experience that we see, quite often with large enterprises is, you go through that initial proof of concept and move a couple of workloads into the cloud, and maybe you see some benefit, based on elasticity, performance, reliability, or even potentially cost. But what happens is once those organizations move toward that next step of larger scale adoption, that could be triggered by a data center lease, coming up, certain workloads that need to move to the cloud. And what happens is that oftentimes leads to a loss of control where, those customers start asking questions, what are we actually paying for? Who's spending, money on this service? Are we accurately able to forecast and budget our spend? Are we running efficiently? Are we maximizing, the resources that we have in the cloud today? So there's obviously a lot of challenges that enterprises are faced with today. I did want to just open it up to one question for the audience. Would love to understand, what is your biggest challenge related to cloud cost management today? Is it visibility into spend? Is it, empowering your engineers and workload owners to actually take action on things like optimization opportunities? Is it organizational adoption of FinOps, reducing waste, implementing governance policy at scale, forecasting, showback, chargeback, and cost allocation, managing commitment-based discounts, or even getting to a point of being able to compare spend to unit economics and metrics and KPIs that actually matter to the business and are meaningful to the business. And we'll just give folks a minute here to get some answers in. And this list of challenges, by the way, was drawn from the FinOps Foundation's State of FinOps report for 2023. These were the top challenges identified by enterprise FinOps teams today. We've got a couple of responses already. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so to see if we get any more. We're still at 2 responses. So looks like empowering engineers to take action and cost allocation were called out as a couple of challenges that the audience is facing. That's not surprising. Empowering engineers to take action is actually the #1 challenge that FinOps teams are faced with today. Because FinOps is very much a organizational and a cultural practice, it oftentimes requires, careful planning for things like organizational change management and change resistance, in which case, this is why it's the biggest challenge to FinOps teams. Okay, so the FinOps methodology is, once again, a cultural practice. It's really an operating model and a best practice framework that was actually set forth by the FinOps Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation. And it's a way of basically increasing and enabling collaboration between disparate technology, business, finance, and cloud teams that historically may not have spoken together before, spoken to each other before, or worked together before. But much like DevOps, stresses the communication and collaboration between developers and operations in the business, FinOps is really trying to push that same collaboration model between those disparate teams that, now need to be working together to drive toward, really data-driven spend decisions that can affect how much value you're gaining out of the cloud and your spend and your resources that you have today. So the FinOps operating model is typically driven by a core FinOps team, a central FinOps team. In a lot of cases, this FinOps team will live within either a cloud center of excellence model, a cloud governance team, or even sometimes we see it living within finance. But in most cases, where we're most commonly seeing this FinOps team rolling up to now is within that native cloud center of excellence kind of model. The FinOps team needs to work with the engineering, the workload teams, the operations teams, the infrastructure teams to make sure that they're enabling those teams through best practices, through training, to be, the best stewards they can be of their resources and their environments. So making sure that engineering and ops, have near real-time data so that they can make the right decisions for optimizing their usage over time, which usage optimization decisions should always be decentralized to the actual workload owners themselves. That core FinOps team is really responsible for, again, making sure that data is available and that there's fast and timely reporting for those engineering teams. Rate optimization is, really all about, reducing how much you're paying for certain SKUs through, cloud provider discounting, service level discounting, or potentially leveraging the right pricing models for your workload. Rate optimization is most oftentimes handled by that core FinOps team or driven by that core FinOps team to maximize the organizational buying power that you have to make sure that you are getting, the most out of your service level discounts, that you're able to leverage RIs and reserve capacity programs most effectively, at the organizational level and drive toward those FinOps KPIs of reservation versus on-demand usage coverage. But that FinOps team, again, is really, stressing that collaboration between these teams, making sure they're pulling in the right roles, responsibilities for these discussions that have, an organizational impact, like governance requirements, for example. But again, it's really a shared accountability model. So the 6 main guiding principles of FinOps are, teams need to collaborate. So again, it is a cultural model. It is driven by communication, by collaboration between teams, and decisions in the cloud need to be driven by the business value of cloud. And what that means is you really need to be having discussions around, why are we creating this cloud spend? What is the purpose of this? What's the value that's being driven for the business by creating these resources, this workload in the cloud? Everyone needs to take ownership of their usage. It is a shared accountability model. If you have the ability to create a resource in the cloud, you are ultimately responsible for managing that spend. FinOps reporting needs to be accessible and timely. Resource owners need to be able to accurately track their spend, understand where those optimization opportunities may lie, and be able to make those, near real-time decisions to drive spend down. Again, a central team drives the FinOps methodology and drives the practice. In a lot of cases, this could just be 1 or even 2 individuals. As spend increases within organizations, we typically see FinOps team size growing with that spend. The average team size or FinOps team size for a customer that's spending $1 to $10 million a year, for example, is 2. So it's typically not a large team. Often cases, it's 1 FinOps lead with, some other part-time roles from other areas of the Cloud Center of Excellence, Cloud Governance team, Cloud Engineering teams, et cetera. FinOps is driven by 3 phases, so it's an ongoing, incremental process. The first phase is inform, the second phase is optimize, and the third phase of FinOps is operate. Obviously, to be able to optimize your spend, you first need to have the right level of visibility. If you don't have visibility, you're not going to know where those optimization opportunities may lie. You're not going to know who's spending what. You're not going to know if you're running effectively. So making sure that you're creating the right level of visibility, you're leveraging things like anomaly detection and budgeting alerts through your cloud provider. You're creating, meaningful KPIs and metrics for your team to track ongoing success, and doing things like benchmarking internally and externally against internal teams or against, other industry competitors. In the optimization phase, it's all around, obviously driving less costs through, leveraging programs like reserved instances, savings plans, reserve capacity, making sure that you're right-sizing your resources, deleting idle resources, leveraging licensing programs like Azure Hybrid Benefits, and making sure that you're placing your workload in the right resource type, whether that's, IaaS or potentially moving into a cloud native service type like a PaaS service or a SaaS service. And then the operate phase is all around driving continuous improvement and continuous value to the business through things like process improvements, automation, culture and OCM, making sure that you are planning for change, managing that change resistance, and creating the right feedback loops so different teams and owners of resources can give feedback into processes and actually make their voices heard. So in the inform phase, the major key activities are around understanding fully loaded costs, which means not just the cost that your business unit is actually incurring, but making sure that any additional costs, like shared service costs, maybe central IT fees, are included in that, so that when business units get their bill at the end of the month through that showback and chargeback report, they have an idea of what their actual consumption and actual bill is going to be, not just the portion that they have, complete control over. Performance benchmarking is important. So again, not just internally benchmarking, but also external benchmarking, looking out and using things like the FinOps Foundation website to identify best practices, stories from other customers that have had similar challenges, making sure that you are creating, again, visibility into spend through showback, chargeback reporting, which also creates accountability, creating scorecards, metrics, KPIs to track ongoing success against what actually matters to you and your business, making sure that you're defining budgets, forecasts, setting alerts, have a granular and thought out tagging strategy and naming strategy. And again, making sure that you have things like anomaly detection in place so that you can be more proactive in your response rather than having to wait till the end of the month when you actually get your bill. So creating meaningful reports is, obviously the most important piece of the inform phase. Creating visibility across, different personas in the organization is going to be very important. You're going to want to create views for executives, views for finance, and different views potentially for your product, your engineering, and resource owner roles. Obviously they're going to care about different things, but making sure that you're enabling reporting across, daily, monthly, quarterly, annual views that show, things like anomalies, trends, forecasts, consumption against budgets, showback, and then even efficiency level reporting so that workload owners can, again, make sure they're optimizing the resources over time. There are a bunch of native reporting options available for Azure today. Cost management is built directly into the portal itself. There's also native Power BI connectors that you can leverage today to pull that data down into a Power BI dashboard and create your own custom reports, as well as there's APIs to leverage to build your own custom solutions. Microsoft also has a Azure Cost Management Power BI template app that is available at no cost. This is on the AppSource Marketplace. Again, you can find this on the Microsoft Azure Cost Management documentation website. There's some links there. And so that's a great tool just to give you some additional visibility out of the box, a little bit nicer dashboarding capabilities than utilizing the portal. And can really help to drive, some additional initial savings as well through some really nice reporting around Azure Hybrid Benefit, reservation recommendations, and others. So one more question for the group. What kind of reporting or cost management tools are you leveraging today? Are you leveraging native tools, homegrown tools, third-party tools, multiple tools, or not sure? And we'll give folks a minute or so to get some responses in. And while we're waiting for these results to come in, I will say that, on average, according to the State of FinOps report last year, on average, most customers are actually utilizing an average of 3.7 tools to help with their cost management and their FinOps initiatives. So in most cases, most customers are actually utilizing multiple tools, whether it's a mix of native tools and third-party tools that maybe they've already invested in, maybe some homegrown tools for some specific use cases, along with native. But again, it's typically a mix. The big takeaway here is that there's really no one silver bullet, one tool that does everything better than everything else. All of the different third-party tools out there today have their different strengths, their different weaknesses. The native tools are typically the most utilized tools that we see. Obviously, not having to pay for that is a big contributing factor to that. But the cloud providers have been doing a lot over the past couple of years to drive more value out of those native tools and native solutions that they provide. We only got one response, but it was third-party tool, so that's interesting. Rick had a good call out in the Q&A. When you are selecting this, make sure that you do hit submit. If you don't hit submit, your response won't get tallied up here. And we did get 2 responses, so the other customer is using multiple tools, which again is the most common. As you move into the optimize phase, as you're going through this FinOps journey, it's really all around, again, enabling real-time decision-making for your workload, your engineering teams. So that FinOps team is, again, making sure that there is fast and timely reporting available for those workload teams so they can make those decisions near real time. Predicting and purchasing capacity through programs like reserved instances, reserved capacity, and savings plans are typically where you can drive the most savings out of your optimization efforts. But it's always recommended to go through a right-sizing process first. So if you're not right-sizing, deleting idle machines, you could be actually reserving capacity or committing to capacity that you don't actually need. So, order of optimization is important. So always want to right-size first, remove unused resources, and then look to commit to those capacity and reservation programs. Automation is another big area where optimization that can help. So making sure that you are, doing as much as you can to take away responsibilities off of the plate of those actual workload owners through automation of things like Azure Hybrid Benefit, for example. If you own licenses, you can automate the application and the enforcement of that program. And centralizing your buying process and workflow is another big area here with optimization, so you can maximize your service level discounts and make sure that you're leveraging reservations in a way that those are getting fully utilized. So in the optimization phase, there's really 2 buckets that we group optimization into, which is usage optimization and rate optimization. And the reason is, in the simplest terms, cost in the cloud is equal to usage quantity times rate. So if you want to reduce your cost, you have 2 levers to do that: either reduce the amount that you're using or reduce the rate that you're paying for that product. So again, order of optimization is important. You always want to be optimizing usage first, and then looking to commit to those rate discounts through things like reservations, savings plans, etc. And when we're talking about usage optimization, we're really talking about things like right-sizing resources. So making sure that, if you over-provision resources, that you are adjusting those over time and right-sizing those resources as you understand your actual usage. Right-sizing things like SQL database, for example, make sure you're leveraging the right SKU types, the right meter types for, your specific workload. PaaS right-sizing, making sure that you have the right minimum instance count set for your PaaS services, have auto-scale enabled where appropriate. From a storage standpoint, making sure that you're leveraging things like data lifecycle policy to move data between different blob tiers based on availability, usage, etc. And then things like automation, setting up start and stop schedules for dev test VMs maybe a pending Azure hybrid benefit on eligible resources through Azure policy, making sure that you're cleaning up idle and orphaned resources on an ongoing basis. You can even create automation to do this. Maybe you create an Azure policy to identify unattached disk volumes and then run a PowerShell script on a monthly basis to delete anything that's out of compliance to that policy. From a rate optimization standpoint, this is again where we're talking about things like reserved instance programs, which are really just a upfront commitment program for VM usage. So you have to commit either to a 1 or 3 year term. You have to commit to either a specific instance type or an instance family that you want to reserve capacity for in a specific region. And you can turn on, things like, shared scope to make sure that it's, spread across the entire organization. You can scope it to an individual account, subscription, resource group. And you can also make it so it's shared across all VM types within a specific VM family. Azure Reserve Capacity Program is available for over 20 different services today within Azure. All of the different services have their own sets of terms and conditions, so just be very aware of that and be very careful about that, because some programs like Databricks, for example, have a zero cancellation policy. And for example, with Databricks, it's not always easy to do the calculation and determine exactly what you need to reserve, because with Databricks, your reservations are being measured in what they call DBCUs, but your actual usage of Databricks in the cloud is being measured by DBUs, which are not the same. There is a ratio that you actually have to use to determine what your DBCU usage is over time at the different SKU levels, so you know what to actually reserve. Otherwise, you might be reserving a lot more capacity than you need if you're not doing that calculation correctly. And again, then you're stuck with that reserve capacity because there's no cancellation. Savings plans are a really good opportunity for those environments that maybe aren't a great fit for reserved instances. So, typically reserved instances are really leveraged in production, shared service environments that have longevity, that are going to be there for a year for the full term of the reservation, and that they're going to be on, at least 70% of the time or more. Azure savings plans can really be applicable to those inconsistent environments, because if you know your baseline of compute usage over time in a development environment, savings plans are ultra flexible. They don't need to be applied to a specific type of SKU or type of VM. You just commit to a minimum compute cost for a fixed hourly amount for either 1 to 3 years. So if you know that every hour or in your development environment, you're spending a minimum of X dollars per hour on compute, and that has. I just froze there for a second. I was talking about savings plans, and if you commit to savings plans, you're committing to an hourly amount. So if you know that you have X dollars amount of compute spend in that dev environment over time, you can commit to just that minimum baseline level of usage. And when you do that, you get discounted up to that level. And anything over that amount, you'll just be paying on demand rates. So it's very good for those development, those more inconsistent environments where you don't want to be tying this to a specific resource or a specific resource type. Azure Hybrid Benefits is a bring your own licensing program that Microsoft enables Azure customers to use. So if you own Windows Server licenses or SQL Server licenses with software assurance, you can actually take those licenses into the cloud. And they do allow up to 180 days of dual use rights. So if you're migrating a workload, you can use it both on-premise and in the cloud for that 180 days. And once that 180 days is up, you will have to choose where that license is going to live long-term. Again, AHUB is tied to software assurance, so it can only run during the software assurance term. If your software assurance term runs out, you want to make sure that you are re-upping that to stay in compliance. And from a SQL standpoint, Microsoft actually released a capability called Centrally Managed SQL AHUB, where you can actually identify the number of cores that you own or core licenses you own for standard and enterprise, input those into this tool, and it will automatically apply your SQL licenses where it's eligible across your organization while keeping you in compliance and not going over those numbers of eligible usage. And so in Azure, there's a native optimization tool called Azure Advisor. It auto runs in the background to assess your workloads against the 5 pillars of the well-architected framework, which cost optimization is, of course, included as one of those 5 pillars. So you can really customize your thresholds for your recommendations here. You can create alerts and subscriptions into these recommendations. You can individually click on the different recommendation types and click down to the individual recommendations themselves. Some of these you can actually act on through Advisor itself. And there's also a new feature called Advisor Score, which does a pretty cool thing. It actually gamifies a score against the well-architected framework. So you can track people's success over time, and you can also start to put some weight to those recommendations via that score impact. So it's a great way to just kind of track progress over time, track different maturity across different teams when it comes to managing their resources. And it's a great conversation starter for some of those ongoing discussions and processes that you're going to want to put in place. So one last question is around cloud resource performance. So do you have visibility into cloud resource performance today, and how much, if your resources are actually being used? And it looks like this didn't get put into the actual polling capabilities. So if anyone does want to answer this, please just put your response in the Q&A. Would love to understand if folks are actually right-sizing based on performance data today, or if they're really struggling with that visibility today. Okay, I'm going to move on to operate. So the final phase of FinOps is the operate phase, which is all around continuous improvement and providing ongoing business value to the different workload teams, technology teams that FinOps is supporting. So it's all around creating the right collaboration, again, between IT, between finance, between the different lines of business, between the Cloud Center of Excellence. You really want to drive accountability in this phase. So creating things like ongoing reviews, monthly business reviews with stakeholders for optimization. Maybe you can review that advisor score during that session. Tracking and trending against organizational goals and initiatives to make sure that you are keeping your eyes on the prize. And then ongoing refinement of things like cloud governance, cloud adoption framework. Making sure that you have the right guardrails in place to prevent overspend. And so an example of some of those processes that you may be looking to put in place as part of the operate phase, or to really kind of formalize this FinOps function, are things like ongoing report monitoring, ongoing optimization reviews, monthly FinOps team reviews, show back chargeback report generation, ongoing monthly business reviews with stakeholders, quarterly planning sessions with finance to make sure that you are tracking and reviewing budgets over time, identifying new potential workloads that could change those budgets and those forecasts, and then annual planning to, again, review your last year of spend, identify additional opportunities for things like service level discounting, where maybe you had some significant growth in a certain service area year over year. And maybe looking at pre-commitments and refocusing those FinOps priorities on an ongoing basis. Policies, automation, and process improvement are different areas that you can really focus on within the operate phase. From a policy standpoint, again, just enabling success through automation and guardrails is a really important piece. So making sure that you have tagging requirements, set through Azure policy. You're modifying your cost center tags and its value to resource groups, and then you're pushing that inheritance down to those resources within those resource groups. Having a policy to allow certain regions, that meet your requirements. Maybe having a service catalog with allowed VM SKUs and allowed service types, depending on different environments. And then policies to do things like enforce or append Azure hybrid benefit usage on Windows VMs, for example. Other automation capabilities that you can work on during this operate phase are things like auto start and shutdown schedule solutions, which there are some solutions actually available in the Azure Marketplace already today. Cleaning up unused resources, such as unattached disks in a programmatic way. Enabling auto scale wherever you can. Utilizing serverless and auto pause features where available. And from a process standpoint, making sure all assets have an identified owner, so that you know who to follow up with if there's an issue with that cost or with potential optimization opportunities. Developing a cross-functional RACI chart for FinOps activities is also very important, making sure that, again, in this shared accountability model, that all the different personas understand what their specific roles and responsibilities are when it comes to managing costs. Requiring approval for non-standard cost profiles, so having an exception process for things like Azure policies that restrict different service types. And then requiring cloud education to include a FinOps course is another very important piece. Training and enablement is a big piece of the FinOps operate phase, making sure that different workload teams, different operating companies within your organization, all at least have a baseline of knowledge of what they're responsible for and how they can manage their resources effectively. So one last question here. Has your organization made FinOps training enablement a priority? The options are yes, we include it as part of our standard cloud training curriculum. We have some individuals with FinOps training and certs, or no, we have not. I'm so interested to see what folks respond with here. And don't forget to click submit, as Rick pointed out. Okay. So 50-50 split right now between yes, it's included as part of the standard cloud training curriculum, and we have some individuals with FinOps training and certification. So that's fantastic to hear that, at least, half the respondents are actually including it as part of a standard training curriculum. We were working with one organization, a Fortune 50 oil and gas company, that actually had created what they called a cloud driver's license program. So within that program, was a requirement for a FinOps training, as well as a requirement to make sure that those individuals had at least gone through the foundational training for their individual cloud providers that they'll be using, along with a company-specific operating model and company-specific governance requirements and FinOps requirements. So including that as part of a standard program is a great way to go. That specific customer, that cloud driver's license program, was a requirement to gain access to cloud. So if you wanted access to a cloud resource, your own subscription, a resource group, you had to complete that training program ahead of time. So it's a great way just to make sure you create that right level of baseline knowledge before actually giving access to resources. So, where can you go to get more mature in FinOps and to get some additional information? Well, obviously the FinOps Foundation, FinOps.org, is a really great place to start. But there's also a bunch of benchmarking tools out there that are available to you. So things like the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework Governance Benchmark tool is a great way to start looking at, from a governance standpoint, have we planned for cost management? There's also the well-architected review, which has a cost optimization review. So if you're looking at assessing individual workloads to understand if you're leveraging the right pricing models, the right SKU types, you have the right configurations in place to manage costs. That's a great way to do that. And then there's also a FinOps maturity assessment that was created by the FinOps Foundation, which there's a link here as well. I would also encourage anyone that is doing this in their day-to-day to go out and actually get certified. The FinOps Foundation offers certifications for different roles, for practitioners, for professionals, for engineers, for finance-specific roles, procurement-specific roles. So there's a lot of different learning paths out there that are available today, depending on what your focus is in your specific role. And then obviously, reach out to us if you have any questions, if you need some support on this journey. We have dozens of FinOps certified practitioners, professionals, and cloud success managers at Insight that have experience with this, have a ton of experience supporting customers and helping them through these main challenges that we discussed today. And also be sure to get registered for the follow-on webinars. We do have another 4 webinars that are subsequent to this one around managing cloud for growth and innovation, maximizing app innovation, maximizing your data intelligence, and then making sure that your cloud is secure. So please do join us for these follow-on sessions. And thank you again. I think now we can open it up to Q&A if there's any questions that have come through in the chat. I don't see any current questions in the chat, so if anyone has any burning questions that they want to ask, maybe they were considering asking, but were maybe scared to step forward, please do. Would love to address any questions, concerns, follow-ups that anyone has. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. So if anyone thinks of anything after the fact, please just reach out to your client executive at Insight, and they'd be happy to get you in touch with us and address any of those concerns or questions you might think of. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I hope everyone has a great rest of your Wednesday, and we look forward to seeing you on the next. Actually, I did get one question that just came in. How to go about FinOps to implement governance? That's a great question. So when we're talking about implementing governance around FinOps, it's usually all around, there's usually a couple of different areas. Typically resource consistency is the main concern. So in a lot of cases, a lot of customers rely on tags, rely on naming, rely on, that metadata to be there so they can accurately report on their spend. So in a lot of cases, financial governance is very much focused on resource consistency. So enabling tagging standards through Azure policy and automation, making sure that you have tags enforced that need to be there, where it's important, where you have specific tags that need to be followed, making sure that you're creating a lab parameters list with those tags called out, so that folks can't create improperly spelled tags, accidentally forget to capitalize or lowercase a specific letter. Tags are case sensitive, and tags are not retroactive. So making sure you have the right tag on the resource from the start in the right way is very important. So leveraging policy to do that is one way, but also it's really around cost prevention as well. So what can we put in place for guardrails that could prevent overspending from happening? Things like, restricting Azure regions to only include, approved regional pairs for your environment, so that folks aren't creating resource groups or subscriptions or resources outside of those, standard regional areas that you've identified, which can do things like prevent data transfer costs and some of those costly, networking charges when you're going across regions. Again, it could be things like restricting service types. So maybe that you don't want folks using, Databricks or a specific service in your environment. You can restrict that through policy with an exception process so that folks don't accidentally spin up very expensive resource types that you don't need them spinning up today. Restricting different VM SKU types. Maybe you don't want folks utilizing some of the very expensive memory or GPU optimized machines or high performance compute machines, which can be very, very costly for an hourly rate. So putting in place some of those guardrails and creating kind of that service catalog is a really good way to prevent overspending and wrap some governance around your financial system cloud. Hopefully that answered the question.